Hey y'all, what's up? Welcome. I am making sure I can see the things and that y'all actually come on live with me because sometimes it takes a minute. So we are going to be talking about collective trauma today, how we heal from trauma that's really pervasive, that affects a lot of people at once. Okay, I think I see a couple of you coming on. If you want to say hi, I'd love to say hi to you. If you're watching on the replay, you can hashtag replay. So this is also going to be going up as a podcast episode. So to all of my podcast listeners, hi, hello, welcome. And actually, I was planning on recording this episode in a few weeks. This is a topic that we've really wanted to delve into more. And actually had someone reach out yesterday and ask about this exact topic, if we had resources. And so I was like, you know what, we're just going to do this now because this is timely and it gets to happen. So for those of you who are not sure, maybe you clicked on the title, you're not sure what collective trauma is, I'm going to start off with a definition of that. And then we're going to go through using a phenomenal, what's the word I want? Framework that was developed by Dr. Judith Herman. And I'm adding in a few things from Dr. Eric Gentry at the Arizona Trauma Institute and from Bruce Perry, who's a really phenomenal child trauma expert, and a lot of other places. But the foundational framework we're going to use is one from Judith Herman, she's a phenomenal feminist trauma researcher. And so that is what I'm going to walk y'all through today. And honestly, this is I don't know that I would have been ready to have this conversation with y'all a year ago when we started the Institute. This is a big one. So when we talk about collective trauma, right? Collective trauma is something that actually we all now have experience with. If you were connected to any other humans at all and knew that the pandemic was happening while it was happening, guess what? The pandemic is a collective trauma. So a collective trauma is something that causes harm, that has a significant impact, negative impact on a group of individuals, anywhere from a few people to, the world. So billions of people. So some other examples, like, right, the pandemic was a global collective trauma. Every person who was touched by it or even understood that it was happening probably has some residue, has some past pain, and maybe even some residual pain from that. So the pandemic, I think, while I do not savor the fact that it occurred, it has been a really, really good example of how every single person can undergo something that is really traumatic and come out and have a different experience based on how close you were to the trauma, how personally impacted you were by it. So, that's a good example to use, and one that I'll be referring to through the course of this. Some other examples, this can be the loss of a human that is really is really well connected to a group of people. So an example of this would be, firefighters. If you have a team that is very closely knit, that relies on each other for safety, and one of your team members is harmed or passes away, you lose them from that. That can be a collective trauma. Another collective trauma can be, several individuals being together in a space where they are in community and having another individual or individuals harm them. So an example of this, any of our nightclub shootings that have happened in the last several years, school shootings, examples of like Waco, Texas is one that I like to bring forward. So things that play out, that we see play out in the news, where a person or persons decide to actively harm other humans, oftentimes based on their identity, how they are identifying. So that's another piece, or another example of collective trauma. Another example of collective trauma would be finding out that a singular person or a group of people has been harming a group of people, and that the humans that experience that harm, it's been invalidated, or it's come to light because nobody felt safe sharing it. So an example of this would be harm against minors or women in a space where if they were to come forward, they would have experienced significant psychological harm or potential physical harm. And so they stayed quiet. And at some point, the truth of what is happening comes to light, and there's a lot of aftermath that happens from that. So there's significant big T traumas happening to individuals, and then the collective trauma occurs almost like in medicine, in healthcare. One of the things we talk about is primary injury, secondary injury, and tertiary injury. And so the primary injury is where the active harm occurs, right? I fall and break my leg. The secondary injury is when my immune system and my inflammatory system, they try to like heal that immediately. So like my circulatory system, my immune system, they create a lot of inflammation in that area. There's some blood loss in that area because those two systems in my body are trying to respond to the injury. So that's secondary, right? And then tertiary is where we get an infection, or where the wound doesn't heal properly and we have to potentially, remove a limb. There's lots of surgeries that are having to happen, and then there's damage from that. So that's tertiary injury, right? When we think about that from a trauma perspective, collective trauma, sometimes we see primary, secondary, and tertiary. So using the example of the pandemic. In the pandemic, the primary injury for a lot of people was, well, there were a couple primary injuries. The actual primary injury was getting COVID yourself, right? Getting sick yourself and your body having to go through that. One of the other primary injuries that we saw in the pandemic was the social isolation that occurred around people. So one of the things that we know this about humans because we're mammals, and mammals need connection in order to survive. Mammals need psychological connection and love in order to survive. In fact, as humans, if we receive no love, no connection whatsoever, we actually experience something called failure to thrive. And failure to thrive is literally that. It's where we lose our ability to thrive. Our body will stop absorbing the calories we're taking in. Our appetites will drop off. We'll see depression. We'll see withdrawn. We see this in older adults, and we see this in kiddos who don't receive what they need from a connection, love, touch, belonging perspective. So that in itself was also a primary injury that a lot of us felt and experienced. And the secondary injury is, okay, now there are all these things that are changing around me, right? There's all of these things that are changing. There's new rules. I have to wear a mask. Can I wear a mask? Should I wear a mask? Is it safe for me to do that? Can I connect with other people? Is it safe for me to do that? Is it safe for me to go grocery shopping? Is it safe for me to do this? All of these things are changing. The way in which we are interacting with the world changed. And there was a lot of injury in that. There were a lot of things that happened that felt unsafe. And we are not going to have the discussion about what was right or what was wrong or what should have happened when and where. I want to keep this really general and as unbiased as possible. And no matter what you believed about what was happening, there was some secondary injury occurring. There was a loss of feeling safe and feeling certain, right? Humans really like to feel certain. We like to know that we have agency, like we can make decisions for ourselves, and we like to know that we are safe, that we are physically safe and we are psychologically safe. And all three of those pieces were altered during the pandemic for us. And then third, the tertiary injury is really when you think about the aftermath, all of the things that are now different and maybe not better, all of the things that are different and not better that we are still sorting through, right? One of my biggest frustrations was that we decided from a languaging perspective to use the term social distancing instead of physical distancing. And that really like ground my gears as somebody who, is focused in on trauma and healing and recovery and connection and nervous system regulation. I was like, we don't want to socially isolate. We just want to physically distance. That's what we want to do, right? That's what we're saying we want to do. And we're like, the terminology we're choosing is actually creating more isolation for people. That was one of my things of really feeling frustrated and a little scared and uncertain around, oh my gosh, like people are going to start isolating themselves now, even socially. And we know that that's not good in trauma. So that was like one of the big areas for me that that created some tertiary injury. So what I want to walk y'all through is a model that we can use, a 3-step model that we can use when collective trauma happens, understanding that there are levels of hurt. There are levels of what I like to refer to, and if you've never heard me talk about trauma before or define trauma before, let me do that really quickly. Trauma is not the event itself, it's the aftermath. It's the residue that's left. It's, we can all go through something that is painful or threatens our physical safety, meaning our life or our health. We can also all go through something that threatens our psychological safety. If we are loved, if we belong, if we can stay connected to the people that we care about. And trauma is a residue that shifts. It shifts how safe we feel in the world. It shifts how connected we feel in the world. It shifts if we feel like we belong. And so something is traumatic for one person and maybe not traumatic for another person because person number one who goes through this maintains their love and their safety and their belonging and their connection with other people. And yes, maybe there was some physical harm and they were attended to. What they went through was validated. They were able to feel their feelings and process their emotions and move it through their body. Person number two maybe goes through the same thing and the humans that are surrounding them don't validate them. They actually are threatened with loss of love and belonging and safety if they talk about what's happened to them. Nobody encourages them to feel their feelings or to really go through this process that I'm going to walk you through, or like there's no consideration around the fact that there's aftermath for this person, that the world looks different now that they've gone through this experience. So the thing is, the question that we have after a collective trauma is, how do we move forward? How do we heal as a group, collectively, and as individuals inside of that community when things like this occur? And honestly, the reason that I want to put this out here, this felt really big. And the reason I wanted to put this out here and felt called to do this, have this conversation today and share this with y'all is because I don't see anybody talking about how we do this. I don't see anybody talking about how we do this, even in a small group of 2 people. That's a collective, right? That's a community. 2 people together is a community. There's connection. How we do this, in connection with other people. A lot of times we're talking about how we do trauma work as individuals and as, how we do the work, quote unquote, ourselves. And I really want to talk about how we do this as individuals, and also how we do this as caring professionals, as humans who maybe are going to be having people come to us that have experienced collective trauma, and also as a community. So again, this model is primarily from Judith Herman's book Trauma and Recovery and her trauma research. Like I said, there's some this is an amalgamation of a lot of people: Bruce Perry, Eric Gentry, Stephen Porges, Peter Levine. I always want to say Levine. And a lot of other people. Okay. The other thing I want to say is this is not new. This is not new. We as humans have known how to help each other heal and move forward from in the aftermath of unspeakable trauma and events since the dawn of time. And I think that, and there's so many places in which we have improved as humans. I think this is one of the areas that we've actually backslid a little bit, because our world today is created in such a way that we can end up feeling really isolated. Even though we're connected to a bunch of people, we can feel isolated. And so we know how to do this instinctively. So what I'm going to tell you, yes, this is researched, and yes, but like this isn't something that you have to understand science to be able to do. This isn't something that you have to be a have a doctorate in something to be able to do. This is something that we instinctually know. If you watch little kids, they instinctually know how to do this. So this is a remembrance, okay? I'm giving you a system around remembrance, around inner knowing, because we know how to do this. So the first piece, step 1, and I want to be emphatically clear when I say this. Step 1 must happen. Step 2 and step 3 kind of vacillate in between each other, right? Like sometimes you'll be in step 2 for a minute, and then you'll move to step 3, and then you'll come back to step 2, step 3, step 2, and occasionally you'll go back to step 1 and you'll redo things. But step 1 really needs to be in place. It needs to be in place prior to moving to step 2 and step 3. And this is the fundamental mistake that I see people make, okay? What I learned when I was going through my training as a clinical trauma professional is that without step 1, going to step 2 and step 3 is actually dangerous. And I'll show you why in a minute, but I want to just say that before I even get into this. Step 1 is where we start. And a lot of people are going to try to start at step 2 or try to start at step 3, and we really need to bring them back to step 1. So step 1 is safety. And it's 2-pronged. It's physical safety and it's psychological safety. So until you feel physically safe, until you know that the person who has harmed you is not going to harm you anymore, until you know that you are not going to be at threat of loss of your life or your health, we don't move forward. The focus is on getting you safe. The focus is on getting you safe. The focus is on getting your nervous system regulated to the point that you can make moves, okay? So we need to have you physically safe. The other piece is we need to build and create some psychological safety. Even if it's not in your entire life at this point, it's in at least a place. There's a place where you can feel psychologically safe, and there's a place that you can feel physically safe. Okay, so I'm going to use the example of domestic violence. because I think that from an individual perspective, this is helpful to understand, and then I'll use a collective example in a moment. So interpersonal violence, domestic violence. If I have somebody who is in the middle, is still in a relationship where domestic violence is occurring towards them, we're not going to work on processing their trauma. We're not going to work on helping them, be advocates for other domestic violence survivors. We are going to establish a safe place between me and them, or between them and another group of humans, where they feel physically safe, where their body can remember what that feels like. Okay. And where they feel psychologically safe, where they can say, I'm being hurt, I'm being harmed, and this does not feel good. And have that be validated. So that is crucial. One place in their life where they can come, even if it's for an hour a week, and they can feel physically safe in their bodies and remember what that feels like, and they can feel psychologically safe. And so what we can do as humans in space with other humans who have experienced trauma, collective trauma, is to be someone who provides that safe space. Now, you might be like, I don't have any training doing that. I have no idea how to do that. Remember, hear me, you innately know how to do this. It's actually much simpler than you think. Creating space, a safe space for someone, or a safer space for someone, both psychologically and physically, means that when that person is with you, you are attuned to them. Attuned, A-T-T-U-N-E-E. Sorry, I did that wrong. A-T-T-U-N-E-D. I'm not known for being able to spell out loud. You are attuned to them. You are practicing attunement. You are co-regulating with them. And so what that means is you're paying attention to your nervous system and using regulation exercises to bring yourself back to a more calm state. And you are practicing attunement with the person in front of you, which is undivided attention. You are here with them. They are your focus. And unconditional acceptance. Whatever you tell me here, I'm not going to judge you for it. I'm not going to judge you for it. If you tell me that this domestic violence has been occurring for 12 years, I'm not going to judge you for that. If you tell me that this domestic violence has occurred in front of your children, I'm not going to judge you for that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be here, and I'm going to be a safe place for you to share what's going on. And I'm going to validate you in your experience. I'm not going to say it's right. I'm not going to say it's wrong, because both of those are judgments. And my judgment is not going to serve you here, because what you need is a place where people aren't judging you, so that you can experience that and start to take that with you into other areas of your life. So understand that the people who come into your space who have just experienced a trauma, their nervous systems are on alert, and their nervous systems can be on alert in one of two ways or both ways simultaneously. Their nervous systems can be hyper aroused. They can be having a lot of intrusive symptoms, meaning they're having flashbacks, meaning they're having anxiety, they're having panic attacks, they're having hallucinations, they're jumpy, they're hyper aroused, there's extra adrenaline in their body. Their sympathetic nervous system is jacked up. And they can also be experiencing hypoarousal and more constrictive symptoms, meaning they're cutting themselves off from people. They are feeling more depressed. They are feeling stuck. They are feeling frozen. They are feeling like they're not sure what to do. They're feeling like they can't think. They're dissociating. They're checking out. They're numbing. They're using substances to try to not feel the feelings. They feel hopeless. They feel helpless. So understand that people can come to you with these intrusive and constrictive symptoms, and with these two different ways, or a combination of the two ways, of their nervous system being activated. And so being around other nervous systems that are calm that are regulated is key. I've told this story, I think, on this podcast probably more than once, and I know I've told it in the Facebook group, but it's such a great example, right? The way that I learned when I was acting as a nurse practitioner, I used to respond to what we called rapid response or emergency responses or codes. And like emergency rapid responses were like pre-code, right? This person was not actively dying, but they were close. And the way that I learned how to respond to codes as somebody who used to run them and run rapid responses is when I was a nurse, I was in a code, and our physician was in there running the code, and his attending physician came in. And before the attending physician came in, it was a little hectic, right? Obviously, this is a dangerous situation. This is an emergency. And that attending came in, he double checked, very calm, very relaxed, came in, just casually asked the fellow how he was doing. The fellow told him kind of nervously, like, this is what's going on. This is what I've done. This is what we're going to do. And he said, okay, great. You're doing a fabulous job. I'm going to be in the corner if you need me. And he sat down in the corner and he pulled out a newspaper and he read the newspaper while the fellow ran the code. And I remember being like, oh my, like, what? What is this? And it was actually really helpful because years later, when I was doing the same thing as this fellow, I remembered thinking, you know what? That attending physician was saying, there's no need to panic. We've got this. We're good. There was a level of attunement when he checked in with the fellow. Are you good? Do you have everything you need? Okay, I'm right here. As humans, when there is somebody who is quote unquote in charge and they are calm and they are collected and they are able to attune with you, and you can feel that in their nervous system, you can feel the regulation and the groundedness in them, that actually helps you ground and helps you regulate. So understand that our goal in this safety process is to help this human as they move forward from the thing that's happening, either if it's still currently happening or if it's done and we are recovering and trying to heal from it, is helping this person's nervous system come back to a state of regulation. And so some of the things that are really important here are sleep, hydration, routine, exercise, sunlight, physical touch, all of the things that we know help our body regulate. Now, here's the other piece that is important to understand. However someone is showing up after they have gone through a trauma like this, however someone is showing up, as long as they are not actively, like emergently hurting themselves, harming themselves, like to the point that they're putting themselves in danger, or harming someone else, whatever they're using to cope, cool. And a lot of people hear me say that and they're like, it's okay if somebody's drinking like a bottle of vodka a night. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if somebody is blacking out, drinking alcohol to the point that they're blacking out and driving, that is potentially significantly harmful to themselves and to others. However, someone's drinking a couple glasses of wine every night, okay. Someone's smoking a pack of cigarettes a day, okay. Someone's doom scrolling on social media and checking out for a couple hours a day, cool. Someone's sleeping 16 hours a day, okay. Like they go to work, they do the bare minimum and they come home and they sleep, okay. Okay. That's okay. Because everybody moves through the aftermath differently. And what we know is that these things that we use, the coping mechanisms that we use in order to quote unquote make it through, If we focus on those instead of on what's causing them to use those coping mechanisms, we're focusing on the symptoms instead of the problem. So if we focus on the problem, the symptoms will get better. It's been a really interesting journey as I've worked with a lot of humans over the last several years, around trauma and around nervous system dysregulation. As we start to create more safety in their bodies, as we remind their body, hey, it's okay to feel feelings. It's okay to cry uncontrollably for 2 hours. It's okay to sleep until you can't sleep anymore. It's okay. And also, let's make sure you have what you need. Let's make sure you're eating. Let's make sure you're drinking let's try to get a little more water in you. You need meds to help you sleep for a little bit? Great. You need meds to help with the anxiety for a little bit? Okay. You need meds to help with the depression for a little bit? Okay. As we help people with that, as we support people and getting their bodies and their nervous systems back to a more regulated state. And that is, when I say safety, that's really what we're looking for. Yes, they're physically safe, and yes, they're psychologically safe outside. And also, we are re-regulated inside. As we start to do that and create more of that safety, and this person feels like, okay, yes, I feel valid in the experience that I've had. I feel like I understand why I'm having the symptoms that I'm having. Once we've established that, and we start to move into these next two stages, you'll start to see the coping mechanisms shift. You'll start to see them shift. I've seen this over and over and over. As somebody who bit their nails for 30 years, I stopped biting my nails when I stopped having so much hyperarousal in my body. I see people start using alcohol less, using sex as a way to numb out less. I start seeing people, becoming more connected with other humans and not isolating as much, having less of these intrusive symptoms, having less of these constrictive symptoms. And what's fascinating is that learning how to regulate your nervous system as part of this safety, and we have a lot of podcasts and Facebook Lives on this. There's one back in season 1, O is for overwhelm. I did one on the easy method. I can't remember when. I'd have to go back and look, but we have episodes on how you can regulate, some ways that you can regulate your nervous system. We call those forward-facing trauma practices. What we find is that even in humans who've had a significant amount of trauma, even just doing this first step and doing this for the group, right? Ensuring that the group has a routine together too. Okay, we're going to get together every week and we're going to have hold a conversation. We're going to just get together and be able to hug each other and connect and check in and see how everyone's doing and talk about, how we're establishing some more safety for ourselves. Even being able to do that, even with just one other person. What you find is that about 50% of people who have gone through a significant trauma, if we intentionally focus on step 1 and recreating safety for them, that is enough for their physical symptoms and their psychological symptoms to almost disappear, if not disappear entirely, to resolve. Now, this step helps 90+% of people. You're not going to find that data anywhere else. I was watching a TikTok, Gabor Mate, another very influential trauma voice in the space. And he was saying, a lot of what we do medically is we put people on medications to kind of help stabilize, but we don't do this whole safety piece. And the medication, if people need something to help their body, like an external medication or treatment to help their body regulate, that's great, but that's the beginning. Because the next steps are, how do we create safety within their body and in their nervous system off of meds or beyond that? Just because the medications help the symptoms go away does not mean that the trauma has gone away or the problem has gone away. So what we really want to make sure we're doing is creating space for people to feel safe. And then we're going to move into step 2. And step 2 is remembrance, validation is the word I like to say, and mourning or grief. And this is a step that people want to skip right over a lot of times, or they want to like get into it and just plow through it. And honestly, this is probably where you're going to spend most of your time. And you might come back into step 1 because there might be some places here where stuff pops back up that you didn't remember, and you've got to reestablish safety in your nervous system. I've had this personally happen. As I did step 1 and started moving into step 2, remembrance, mourning, grief around what had happened to me in one place, my nervous system and my brain, my memory felt safe enough to show me trauma that had happened in another place. And then I was dysregulated again, and I went back to the safety, and we reestablished safety. And then we came back to the remembrance and mourning and grief. But this step is where we process. This step is where we add language and meaning to what has happened to us. What a lot of people don't know is that when we go through something traumatic, and when we are in that very hyper aroused and or hypo aroused state within our body, we call it fight or flight or freeze. When we're in those states, the way that our brain works is different than when I'm just sitting here talking to you right now. So our language processing is different. Our sense of time is different. Our sense of meaning is different. How important things are that are happening around us is distorted. So a lot of times you know that somebody has undergone significant trauma if they have a lot of symptoms, a lot of remembrances of the thing, like they know they went through the thing, and they can, like, their body is showing you that it's gone through something, and it's like the process was incomplete. There's still a lot of hyper and hypo arousal in the body, and this person cannot put language to it. And this is why I'm going to say a little bit of a controversial thing. This is why cognitive behavioral therapy and therapies where all you do is talk, where you intellectualize what has happened to you, why we are finding that those therapies are not as effective in, especially in certain populations, as therapies that incorporate somatization, feeling in your body. Things like eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, EMDR, emotional freedom technique, EFT, dialectical behavioral therapy combined with EMDR. I've seen that. Somatic experiencing, embodied processing, root cause therapy when there's somatic brought in, breath work. What we know is that the mind is not the only piece that remembers. And the way that the mind remembers isn't always connected or at this, it doesn't remember it at the same intensity level as our body does. So what we're going to do in this state is we're going to process, we're going to feel, and we're going to do it with people who validate those feelings. And if we are doing this in group, if we are doing this in community, not just with one person, but with other people who have gone through this as well, that can be so helpful. The reason that survivor groups and Alcoholics Anonymous and other support groups, the reason we know those are really effective in certain populations, because what they do is they allow the normalization and the validation of feelings and guilt and shame. And, you know, I'm going to tell you about this really awful thing that happened to me. And I know you're not going to roll your eyes at me or, you know, freak out because you've been through something similar. I feel understood and accepted. I feel psychologically safe in this space. And so if I'm psychologically safe in this space, then what I can do is I can do that really hard work. I can drop into my body and feel the things. I can put language to things that happen to me that I've never felt safe putting language to before. I can understand and develop and create meaning around something that hasn't had meaning to this point. And I can grieve and I can get angry and I can say things that I didn't get to say in the moment that I would love to say now, that I wished I could have said then. And I can, internal family systems is another really, really great system that I love to use with my clients, is, understanding your inner child and your inner teenager and like your parts, the parts of you that maybe feel different about the situation. There might be a part of me that when this traumatic event happened felt excited, and there might be a part of me that felt terrified, and there might be a part of me that felt shame, and there might have been a part of me that felt guilt, and there might have been a part of me that felt love because this person was paying me attention. Like there might be multiple parts of me. There might be multiple feelings and meanings that I understood from this thing that happened to me. And I can really acknowledge all of those. I can grieve the fact that maybe there was some secondary or tertiary trauma. Maybe I went through something alone and I tried to talk to my community about it and nobody listened to me, or I didn't feel safe telling my community about it. And then years later, I found out that lots of other people were going through this too, and none of us felt safe talking about it. And I can feel the grief around that. I can feel the grief around that. I can feel frustrated at the bystanders who stood and watched or didn't protect me or protected somebody else above me. I can feel compassion for myself, for protecting the person that hurt us, or for believing something that now I know is untrue. And I can start to make more sense around the situation. While I may never understand the why of why somebody decided to hurt me, what I can understand is why I responded in the way that I did. I can understand why I have the symptoms that I have. I can understand why the feelings that I feel are present and the sensations that I'm experiencing are present. And I can be here for as long as I need to be. And Dr. Herman says this in her book, and I love this statement because as somebody who's gone through these 3 stages around my own trauma, you will be in stage 2 for longer than you probably desire. You will be in stage 2 for longer than you are planning to be there. And there will be sometimes a feeling in stage 2 that you're never going to get out of it, that it's never going to end. And stage 2 ends. It ends. And yes, sometimes you pop back there as other pieces start to make sense and click in. But you're not going to live there. You're just going to visit there, and the visit may last way longer than you want it to, and the visit will end. The visit will end. And then that takes us to stage 3. And stage 3, and actually before I go to stage 3, let's go back to stage 2 for a second and talk about this communally, right? If there is something big that has happened in your community, we need to create space, a safe space for people to remember and mourn and grieve. We need to create a space where people in your community feel safe coming together and mourning and grieving and remembering and speaking their truth in that protected space, where nothing that is said in that space is going to leave that space. And this is really key. And this is the distinction between stage 2 and stage 3. In stage 2, we are creating a container where things, and in stage 1 as well, where things do not leave this space. We are not the things we are saying are for the people who are in that space's ears only, because they may not be true. They may not be our reality. As we are figuring out what our reality is, what the meaning is, sometimes we're going to say things that we don't mean. And that's part of the process. So that has to be a confidential, private space where people really feel safe saying whatever it is that's coming out and knowing that they're not going to get judged for it. Again, that attunement piece carries through into stage 2. And then stage 3 is connection / reconnection. Because ideally, connection's been happening through this entire process. And this is reconnection in a deeper, broader way. This is where I almost like calling, Dr. Herman uses connection. I like it. I almost like reclamation. I'm going to reclaim my power. I'm going to decide what gets to happen moving forward. I'm going to decide if I want to publicly come out and talk about what happened to me. I'm going to decide if I name my accusers or name my perpetrators. I'm going to decide if I want to help others. I'm going to decide what gets to happen next as part of me integrating what has happened, giving it meaning, and moving on, moving forward. And when I say moving on, I don't mean that we forget. I mean that we integrate it in, and it no longer is a source of dysregulation for us as we continue on. So this is where we move. We make moves and we make decisions from a place of regulation. And one of the things that Dr. Herman really speaks on, and one of the things that actually Dr. Perry speaks on as well, is this is where advocacy work comes in. And also, you don't have to become an advocate. You don't have to decide. You don't have to be me. You don't have to do what I did, where I was like, wow. One of the things that actually felt really traumatic for me was not knowing that trauma was a thing, not knowing that trauma-informed care was a thing in healthcare, taking care of people who were experiencing trauma every day and experiencing my own trauma, my own vicarious secondary trauma from what I was doing as a career. So my advocacy work and my part of my reconnection was, I'm going to start a trauma institute because people need to understand what this is. Because if people can be introduced to trauma-informed care and trauma-sensitive practices, and people can understand this process of how they move through the aftermath of horror and unspeakable events, then that gives so much more meaning to what I went through. And while I wouldn't wish what I went through on anyone, I'm almost glad that I've gone through it, because now it has a meaning and a purpose that is bigger and more than me. And that doesn't have to be how you make meaning or you reclaim. It could be, you know what? I'm still going to go to public places. I'm still going to go back to school. I'm going to go to college and university, even though I was part of this high school tragedy. I'm going to fall in love and get married and or find a partner that I get to live my life with. And I'm going to have my own kids, even though my experience as a child in this group of where collective trauma existed and occurred and was perpetrated, I'm not going to let that affect what I decide to do with my life moving forward. When I have my children, I'm going to protect them. I'm going to ensure they're protected as best as I can. And if they tell me they're hurt, I'm going to validate them, and I'm going to believe them, and I'm going to keep them safe. the reason why the reconnection phase is so important as well is because, again, it brings us back to community. And sometimes we find new communities. We find communities of other humans who have experienced what we've experienced and get it, and who also desire to protect others from that happening again, even if it's just in our own homes. I don't even want to say just, even if it's in our own homes. And the other thing that happens here is that in the reconnective phase, I actually almost think of it as a reconnection to myself. What I understand and what I feel regulated around when I have moved through this connection phase is that it's safe to trust people again. It's safe to go out into the world again, that I don't have to constrict myself. I don't have to constantly be on alert. I can be aware and I can be ready. I can be prepared for if something goes wrong. And I don't have to live in constant fear that something is going to go wrong at any moment. I don't have to be hyper aroused all the time. I can just be aware, alert. And it's a state of understanding my own power and understanding that true safety and true connection and true belonging come from me, right? That my psychological safety does not rest in the hands of someone else. I get to decide if I belong somewhere. I get to decide if I want to love and be loved somewhere. And I get to decide if I want to connect somewhere versus I don't. And that gets to be a choice. I get to decide to be in spaces with people that help, now that I know what safety feels like, now that I know what it feels like after being in these spaces, having somebody believe me, having somebody cheer me on, having somebody listen to me, having someone hold space for me, having someone say, yes, thank you, more, please. I want to hear more. I will sit here until you are done. I will be here with you until you decide that you don't want to be here anymore. Understanding that now, like when we have that experience, when we feel that from other people, we can then really start to do that for ourselves and start to pay attention to, okay, in this space, yeah, I feel really psychologically safe. I feel like if I went to Dr. Lee and I said, hey, I did this thing, I'd be like, okay, tell me more. What happened? What do you think led you to do that? What do you want to do next? Being able to identify those spaces where you are able to flourish and expand, that then also allows you to be that space for other people, whether that's through advocacy work or through restorative justice or through whatever it is you're doing. And the critical piece of this part is that you may decide that you want to tell people publicly about what happened to you. You may decide that you want to tell the story and not use the names of the human or humans who were involved. You may decide that you want to only tell part of the story. You may decide that you want to name one name and not other names, and that gets to be okay. That gets to be valid. You get to decide, okay, do I want to try to pursue justice from the space of, having this perpetrator or the perpetrators, having them um, be held accountable criminally, legally, not just socially? Do I want to go through that process knowing that sometimes that's not going to work out in my favor? That the legal system, and I'm not going to speak for legal systems in other countries. However, I know that they are similar and if or not worse in other countries. In the United States, there's statutes of limitations on things. The burden of proof often falls on the victim as opposed to the perpetrator. The way in which we view certain traumas, collective traumas in our society, is still not equitable. And so you get to decide, is this something that I want to pursue? And do I understand that it is the act of pursuing justice that is what helps me reconnect with myself and others, not the outcome, because I can't control the outcome. I can't control if this person is held accountable or not for their actions. What I can know, though, what I can know is that I didn't stay silent because I didn't want to stay silent. What I can know is I said my piece and my truth, and whatever happens from there is what happens from there, because it's about me saying it more than it is about them having an outcome. And that's a crucial piece, because a lot of times in this connection phase, we decide we want justice. And that would be great if we could get justice here as humans on this earth, and we can't always. It's not how it works. And especially in some forms of collective trauma, it doesn't work at all. So really deciding in what way do I want to move forward from this and make meaning out of this that feels right for me. So if you are somebody who is part of a group that has experienced collective trauma, if you are a person who has experienced individual trauma and you have been invalidated, or there have been secondary and tertiary injuries, and you desire somebody or an organization that understands these 3 steps, understands how to walk people through these 3 steps and support communities in doing so, please reach out to us. This is work that we are deeply passionate about, myself and all of the other humans at the Institute. This is where we really desire, as part of my trauma recovery journey, as part of my reconnection and advocacy and justice work, this is near and dear to my heart. This is deep part of my own personal mission, is to help others experience this and to move through these 3 stages. So if you are personally experiencing this, or you are a caring professional who leads people through, or a caring professional who takes care of people who have experienced these things and you'd like to learn more, or you are somebody who would like us to come in and support you from a community perspective, we would be honored and really, I don't want to use the word excited, but honored and very interested in coming in and helping create that safe space for you and your humans so that you all can find a way to move forward together and have that collective healing. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions at all for my Facebook Live humans, you can drop them in the comments. I will gladly come back and answer those for you. For our podcast humans, our email is in the show notes. Send us the email, let us know your thoughts, and let us know, please reach out if there's any way that we can serve and support you. And I love you all, and I'm sending you all of my co-regulation and attunement through my voice and through the video here. And just know that if no one has told you that what you have experienced is valid, and if no one has offered you that attunement, I want to give that to you right now, because you deserve it. And what you did go through is valid, and the way that you are feeling is valid, and it deserves to be witnessed. So I love you all. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your day, and I'll catch you next time.